The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Georgia Murray, staff scientist for the Appalachian Mountain Club. I'm going to give it about 1 more minute before we get started. Great, I'm seeing a lot of people joining in, and so I think I'm going to get started. Again, this is Georgia Murray, staff scientist for the Appalachian Mountain Club. Hopefully you can all see my screen and hear me well. We will be presenting on the Northeast Alpine Flower Watch project today and learning how to use the iNaturalist app. I'm presenting as well as my research assistant, Annie Ivankow, who will take over about halfway through the presentation. So a few logistics to start off with. Attendees will be in mute only during the presentation, and questions will be held for the end of the presentation. You can fill out the questions in the question box as we go along if you have questions, but we won't go through those until the end. Also at the end during question and answer, you can hit the raised hand icon and we can unmute you. So if you would want to ask your question directly, you can do it that way. This webinar will be recorded and we will distribute it afterwards so that you can review it on your own time. So if you missed anything, you can go back and look at it again. And we also will be emailing out a short survey, and we encourage you to fill that out and provide us some feedback. Okay. So with that, I want to get started, and I will be presenting an overview of the project, and then we'll turn it over to Annie Ivankow for a walkthrough of how to use the iNaturalist app in a little bit more detail. So what we're here today to talk about is a new component of the Appalachian Mountain Club's long-term ongoing plant monitoring work, and it's called the Northeast Alpine Flower Watch. The project is in collaboration with some partners, Baxter State Park in Maine, Green Mountain Club in Vermont, and the Adirondack Mountain Club in New York. The project is funded by the National Geographic Society and the Toomey Foundation. So I'm going to start advancing slides here. So what we're going to cover is some brief background on phenology and climate change. We're going to show you how to get started with iNaturalist on your computer, how to register, and how to join projects in iNaturalist. We're going to show you how to use the iNaturalist app for our project and tips for success on how to participate. So again, our focus here is on the Northeast Alpine areas across the Northeast. And there's a website that you can go to on AMC's web page to learn more. But hopefully you'll learn a lot by sitting through this webinar. So the goals of the project is to track the effects of climate change in the alpine regions by gathering flowering and fruiting time with the help of hikers. And so why are we interested in plant phenology? Plant phenology is basically the timing of seasonal change in plants from year to year in relation to weather and climate. So flowering times, when do tree leaves change color, those are phenological events. And phenology can be used as a climate change indicator. How are plants responding to climate change? Are there winners and losers? Are there some plants that are adapting well, whereas others are not? And so we need to get some baseline information on plants in our region to understand how they are going to respond to the ongoing climate change and the continuing climate change in the future. So what can plants do in response to climate change? They have a few options. They can move to where the climate is more suitable by seed dispersion, for example. They can adapt to the new climate. Maybe they can leaf out earlier as things warm up. Or, unfortunately, some of them may become extinct. And it's all a matter of different plants have different strategies and may fall into these different categories. So what's a simple example of a phenological change in response to climate change? Leafing out earlier is a very simple example of that. And this picture shows the Lowell Cemetery in the 1800s, and then later in 2005, around the same date. So you can see that in this example, it's leafing out. It's much more advanced in the spring in Lowell in response to a warmer climate. And as I mentioned, there's going to probably be winners and losers. A recent paper by Hebridling et al. Looked at a long-term trend in tree leaf out, and has also looked at the woodland plants below the tree canopy, and found that trees were leafing out 5 days earlier from 1850 to present, but the plants were only advancing by about 1 day. And so what this example found was that the flowering plants were at a disadvantage in response to a warmer climate because they weren't able to adapt as quickly as the trees and are getting less sunlight in a warmer spring than they would have been previously to the changes in climate. Another example is how changes in phenology can cause food web disruptions. So this is a European example where English oak was leafing out earlier. The winter moth that relies on the oak was emerging earlier in response to this warmer spring. But the pied flycatcher that is migrating to the region was arriving at the same time, and its population is declining because the winter moth, the food source availability was less. And so again, it's an example of phenological changes have broader implications beyond just the changing in leaf out timing. And the impacts on tourism could be quite large. A lot of tourism is built around peak flowering, for example, of the cherry blossoms in DC, or you think about New England and it's the timing of fall foliage. With climate change, we have more unpredictable timing of spring and fall. And so planning an event around something like peak flowering time becomes more difficult, and you could miss out on when is the peak flowering. The approach that that the Cherry Blossom Festival has taken is basically just to extend the time frame that the festival goes on so that they try to capture the peak flowering time. Another example of how plants are responding in response to a warmer spring is in Henry David Thoreau's wood example, where he tracked plants in the 1800s around Walden Pond, and then researchers came back and looked at that same region and what flowers were there and how they were responding. They found that 27% of the native plants had disappeared and another 36% were sparse. And over the same time frame, the region had warmed quite a bit. So some plants may be not able to adapt to the warmer spring, and they've also found that what's moving in there is invasives, which are much better at being able to adapt to a warming spring. So, next slide here. So AMC has been tracking climate for a long time. Actually, Joe Dodge back in the 30s began monitoring snow depth and temperature here at Pinkham Notch to get a better handle on what the weather was doing right here in the mountains. He realized that the forecast he was getting from Gray, Maine's weather station, National Weather Service, was not as helpful to him when he's trying to predict and track weather locally here. So thanks to Joe Dodge, we have a long-term climate record at Pinkham. He was also a co-founder of the Mount Washington Observatory. So we have some really great long-term records to look at. Is the climate changing in the White Mountain region? And in fact, here is the long-term temperature record, the annual average temperature at Pinkham Notch. And the line through the data shows that it is significantly warming, at a similar rate to what we're seeing in the Northeast. And so it is changing. The top of Mount Washington for the same time frame is also statistically warming, but not quite as quickly. And so we have some variability as we look across the mountains. And so it speaks to the need to not only understand how climate is changing with elevation in mountain regions, but also how are the different plant communities responding to these differences in climate change. This is the snow data from Pinkham Notch, where we're seeing that the snow is leaving, melting out 14 days earlier overall, if you look across the record. So things are changing quite dramatically in the mountains. So AMC has also been doing some long-term mountain plant monitoring. We've mapped tree line in the White Mountains and in Baxter State Park. We've mapped the alpine communities, and we plan to revisit those in the future to see if there's been any shifts. And also our phenology monitoring, which began in 2004, is an ongoing study that we are conducting at our facilities. Here's a map of the top of Mount Washington and some of AMC's backcountry huts, Madison, Lakes of the Clouds, and Mizpah. And down on the corner here, you can see Route 16. These are areas where we have long-term phenology monitoring plots that are basically monitored by our seasonal staff and some core volunteers who come back season after season to help us track the phenology at these plots. And so here is a similar look at the White Mountains, and you can see the green dots are those permanent plots that we're tracking through time and visiting season after season. But what you see, the orange dots, is last year we ran a pilot of what we're talking about today using iNaturalist to get observations in between. So as I mentioned, the climate variability that we have from Pinkham Notch to the summit is there's some differences there in how fast things are warming. And so having these observations that fill in the gaps between our plots is going to be really helpful to us to understand how plants are responding to in our backyard here to climate change. And so why use the iNaturalist app? iNaturalist is a established online database and has an excellent mobile application, and it has a really engaged community already using it online. There's over 17 million observations worldwide going into iNaturalist of all plants and animals. And it's an application that was built to track biodiversity. And so all of our observations that are going into this database can be used by other researchers. And what we're doing is basically taking some of the data that we're most interested in and pulling that back out of iNaturalist to analyze it in relation to those permanent plot observations that I talked about. Its mobile technology allows the hiker to go out with their phone and take a photograph that not only is it a photograph of what the plant is doing at that time, but it has a date stamp and a geolocation stamp, basically a latitude and longitude, and an accuracy of how accurate that geolocation observation is, which is data for us to use as we interpret all of this data coming across. It also allows us to add observation fields, which is important for us because at our plots we're using a specific protocol developed by the National Phenology Network. And what we're doing with iNaturalist is mirroring that same protocol. So the observation fields, which is something Annie will go over with you later in the talk, are fields we added that mirror exactly what we're doing at our plots. So we can pull all this data together. And again, it's a great opportunity for hikers to get involved in helping us fill in the gaps of data that we need to truly understand phenological response across mountain ranges. So as I mentioned, we piloted, and we saw those points on the map. We piloted this past season an iNaturalist project called Flowers and Fauna of the White Mountain National Forest. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like on iNaturalist to give you a sense of what a project looks like, where it tracks the number of observations coming in, the number of species, who's participating, who's providing the most observations or the most species, and which are the most observed species. So we have specific species we've been asking people to help us with, but we left it open to fauna as well, because people use the iNaturalist app because they're interested in what they're all the things, the organisms they're observing, and they want to learn. And I think it's a great app to do that. So we don't discourage using the iNaturalist app to identify other species, but we are certainly encouraging you to use it to track the specific species we're most interested in and the species that we'll analyze at the end of the season. And this is also another screenshot of the map of the White Mountain National Forest that's below the one we just looked at. And I just want to point out that there's a space here that's called the journal, which is where we can post messages to project members. And also you can see where the members show up here. And this is actually the version that I get as a project manager, so that I can do things like export the data and pull it out and compare it to our plot data, for example. So again, this project was funded by the National Geographic Society and also the Toomey Foundation. We're going to use iNaturalist. We're going to focus on alpine species in this particular project, and we're seeking about thousands of plant photos from hundreds of volunteers across the Northeast area. Here's a map of the different regions that are, these are the tops of mountains, obviously, the alpine regions, but they're very important regions to us, even though they look small here. Our target species for this project are Diapensia lapponica, pretty common one that you're going to see up in the alpine region. Bigelow sedge, which you may often look out and think it's a grass field, but it's a sedge plant that we've been tracking. Again, all these species are ones that we're tracking in our permanent plots, and we've been tracking since 2004. Bog bilberry, Labrador tea, mountain cranberry, and this one really is a very small plant. You have to get down what we call belly botany. We do ask for this project to stay on the trails, so we do want to be cognizant of not stepping on or leaning on these plants. But in order to get a good picture of this plant, you do have to get kind of close. So. And mountain avens, which is found in the White Mountains only and in areas in Nova Scotia. If you've visited the Alpine Garden, you've seen this one probably. All right, and now we're at the point where I am going to hand this over to Annie Vankow to walk you through really digging into how to use iNaturalist. Just give me 1 second to pass over to Annie. There we go.
Thank you, Georgia. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today during this lunch hour webinar. So far, Georgia has talked about a bit of the background about the Northeast Alpine Flower Watch, including some information about Mountain Watch in general, which was started in 2004. Moving forward, I'm going to talk about how to use iNaturalist. If you've already become familiar with this app, I'm also going to go into details about how it relates directly to our project. So I will talk about the observation fields and get into some details that hopefully will still be helpful to you, even if you've already become addicted like I have. So moving forward, there are 5 main things about iNaturalist that are important. The website wants to know who you are, what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, and then some sort of evidence of what you saw. So I'm gonna move through this a little slower, piece by piece. The first part, who you are. In order to use iNaturalist, the app and the website, it is important to create an account, and many people use an email address for this. You could use your Twitter, Facebook, any other personal identification thing, but this allows you to take ownership of the observations you add, and it also allows you to license your photos. So when you upload the photos, you can choose to upload them as Creative Commons, allowing other people to use your photos, or you could choose to keep your copyright for those photos. So some people prefer to keep the copyright, others share them. I personally have chosen to license my photos, sounds, and observations so scientists can use my data. You can, if you are viewing the slide, you can see that here. But if you want to do this project, it is important to create an account. You can view the project, however, without registering. So if people do have questions about this, they can still go online and look at the observations without an account. Once you have registered, at that point you're able to join our project. You can search for the project, Northeast Alpine Flower Watch, either on your smartphone or laptop computer, any computer. And then it's important just that you select join the project so that you appear as a member. And as Georgia said, this will let you follow updates. It also lets us see how many people are actively engaged. When you select to join the project, there will be a question: do you want to make your private obscured observation coordinates visible to the project curators? And the default answer for this is yes, but only if I add the observation to the project myself. We prefer if you select yes, no matter who adds the observation to the project. And this is essentially, it allows us to use coordinates that may be obscured because you personally do not want the data public, or for certain species that are listed as endangered or threatened, the observation coordinates will automatically be obscured by iNaturalist. So for us to be able to use that data, you can select this option by joining the project. And if you have more questions, please feel free to type them into your sidebar. So now that you've registered and joined the project, you may have questions about how to actually use the iNaturalist app. There are lots and lots of resources on the iNaturalist webpage. This is one example of about a 1.5-minute long video tutorial showing you how to use the app. I am going to now walk through what it looks like to use the app on a smartphone, but you can always go back to this video later on. Okay, so imagine that you've hiked up Tuckerman Ravine or are in the Alpine Zone in Mount Washington, or maybe you just stepped outside your house and you want to take a photo. So you can take out your smartphone, open the iNaturalist app, and then snap your photo. In this case, I'm going to select next, and you will see this screen that starts to show you some details about the picture. When I'm hiking, I'm usually in airplane mode, but when I take my observations, I turn airplane mode off. At this point, you can honestly just save your photo. The date and location should already be included, and then you can keep hiking. But for those of us that are in an area with cell service or at home, so say you are hiking, take your picture, go home, then you can continue to add information to your observation. So when you have cell service, you can start to explore what species you saw. If you already know the species, then you can start by just typing that name in, or you can allow the iNaturalist algorithm to actually compare your photo with other photos and give you a suggestion on what it thinks the species could be. So in this case, iNaturalist is correct, and it is Diapensia. Once you have the species identified, I'll just make a quick note. If you have no idea what you're taking a picture of, you can still upload the photo and it will just appear as unknown. Other people will help you identify it, so you don't have to worry about that step. Next part is the location. So we do prefer if this location information is as accurate as possible. You can select that on your phone and see how accurate it is. In this example, I have 686 meter accuracy, which is not ideal, but it is within a certain range. You can kind of see the auto road there in the photo. In order to improve this accuracy, you can wait a few moments to try to get more satellites connecting to your phone. So again, as long as airplane mode is off and you've enabled your phone to track your location, this part should work automatically, but it always helps to check. At this stage, you can also change your geo-privacy. So if you're at your house and you're taking a photo and you don't want to share that photo with the world, you could obscure your location or make it private. The next part is the projects. So from your phone, you can also add the observation directly to the Northeast Alpine Flower Watch or one of our other projects. This is the part that allows us to track the important phenology data that Georgia was discussing earlier. And again, at this point, you could actually just save it with all the question marks, walk away, upload the observation, you're good. We'll fill it in later. But if you want to assist us with this process, I'm going to go through what each of those questions means and how to fill it out. So for the first question, flower or flower buds, when you select that question, it will show you the screen describing what that question refers to. So it says one or more fresh, open, or unopened flowers or flower buds are visible on the plant. I've included the photo that I took, even though you won't actually have both in front of you at the same time. In this case, there are flowers, so I select yes. The next question is similar, but gets more detailed. So, are there open flowers? In this case, there are one or more open, fresh flowers visible on the plant. So I will again select yes. The next question, what % of all fresh flowers, in this case buds plus unopened plus opened, on the plant are open? So there are not currently any buds that I see on this Diapensia, which means that 95% or more of the flowers are actually open. The other visible structures are past flower, so they would not be included in this observation. So I will select 95% or more. And are there some flowers past flower? One or more petals have wilted or fallen off, and the remaining ovaries may begin to swell and change color. In this case, there are many on the Diapensia that have moved past the flowering stage and are now starting to fruit. So the answer is yes. And then again, fruits. Are there fruits on this plant? One or more fruits at any stage of maturity are visible on the plant. So this is true for this photo, and I will select yes. I'm just going to make a quick note that all of these observation fields come directly from the National Phenology Network, which is what we are using for the other plots. So we are hoping to be able to directly correlate the data we get from these photos to those plots. And there you have it. You have all of the information. If you're nervous again about answering these questions, we'll double check for you, so you can submit them as they are with question marks, or we'll just double check they're okay. If you submit your photos and you don't get a chance to fill out those fields, you can always do it later on online. We also will be looking for those photos. So even if you are hiking or outside taking photos and don't get a chance to do almost any of the steps I just talked about, we are still going to be looking for your photos, and we will most likely be able to add them to our project without your help. If you're not somebody that spends a lot of time in the Alpine Zone, but you still want to participate in this project, we have other similar projects. Georgia already talked about flowers and fauna of the White Mountain National Forest. We also have a Maine Woods Initiative project, flowers and fauna of the Appalachian Trail Corridor, and flowers and fauna of the Harriman State Park. To highlight the Appalachian Trail Corridor, this project goes through many eastern states, and as you can see, there are some flowers down south right now starting to bloom, including the red trillium and yellow trout lily. So in addition to our Northeast Alpine Flower Watch, which we're really pushing this year, we are going to continue monitoring red trillium, painted trillium, blue-bead lily, Canada mayflower, Canadian bunchberry, hollowbush, and the yellow trout lily. For those of you in New Hampshire, you may realize these aren't going to pop up anytime soon, probably in the next month, but they will start to appear in southern states quite soon. And so for the final portion of this webinar, before we start to answer your questions, we have some tips for success. So first of all, take multiple photos of each plant if you can. Close-ups, leaves, flowers, the full patch. This makes it easier for people to help identify the photos. It gives us more information about how many flowers are open versus closed. And it's fun. Check your location accuracy. So this is when you're hiking, you have your phone on airplane mode. You take airplane mode off. If you wait the extra 30 seconds, it can make a huge difference. Wait to upload photos until after your hike. So if you save your photos on your phone while you're hiking, just upload them once you get back home. That will save time, data, and your battery, which my phone does not have a great battery, so this is essential. And when in doubt, use the question marks for the observation fields. We will fill out the observation fields later on, but we always appreciate your help. And finally, be sure to join the project on iNaturalist. Make sure you opt to share your coordinates, and then also follow along to get updates. We plan to send out blog posts at least once a month. In June, we'll send out many more because that will be our Flower Watch month. So thank you so much for following us this lunch period. We have a few more quick things we want to make sure everyone understands. For this project, we want to make sure people stay on the trail, don't disturb species of conservation concern, be respectful of research sites and equipment, leave the habitat as you found it, obtain permits where required, and don't make public disclosure of sensitive species information. In most cases, if you find something rare, iNaturalist will automatically obscure the information so it is not public. But if you are concerned about any of these things, let us know and we can help you make sure that we're keeping these plants safe. There are many more resources on iNaturalist. If you're not already super familiar with the website, they have great tutorials. I also just like to follow them because they put beautiful photos of wildlife up every single day. Great, so at this point, if you have any questions, please type them into the sidebar. And if you would like to speak, raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can ask your question out loud.
Great, thank you, Annie. I have a few questions that are already in the question boxes that I will go through. So the first question is, I typically use apps such as Gaia in airplane mode. Can I do that with iNaturalist where it uploads data and photos when I have better service? And I think Annie tackled that question pretty well, that yes, indeed, you can hike in airplane mode, but when you actually open the app, you do need to take it off airplane mode, again, so that the app is then using your GPS to locate your observation, and waiting those few extra seconds to get a little bit more accurate location information is really helpful for us. We get the accuracy information with the data that comes across, and so we can tell, if it's a 10 meter, 2 meter accuracy is the best, and that really helps us out. The next question is, I do PCV work with the New England Wildflower Society in New Hampshire. Can I document with Alpine Watch at the same time I'm doing documenting elements? We actually gave a training to the New England Wildflower Society, and I think that the policy for them is to not do this simultaneously because of the sensitivity of your sites. Annie, did you want to add anything to that?
I would say that we recognize some of the plants are the same for what the New England Wildflower Society is monitoring and what we are monitoring. They have a very strict policy about sharing coordinates from species that are on your list. So if you're doing work for them, I would say don't use iNaturalist, but if you see other species along the trail, perhaps on the way to the site that they give you, or if you are out hiking on another day, then it would be okay to share the information, especially for alpine plants, just because many of them are only in the alpine zone, but things like Diapensia are very common in the alpine zone, so they're not as vulnerable as some of the other species.
Great, thank you. The next question is, does it still increase the accuracy if it is in airplane mode? So it has to be off airplane mode altogether for the app to get the geolocation information. So you shut that off first, and then you open the app and then take the photo. Hopefully that answers that. Yes, another question about airplane mode. Does that mean the app does not work well? So if airplane mode is on, it does not work well. I'm not sure it'll work at all. And that geolocation tag is very important to us. So you would have to switch that off while taking observations in iNaturalist. What weeks in New Hampshire Alpine Zone are prime? I would say that June is our Flower Watch month. But the second week in June is typically the peak timing of alpine flowers in New Hampshire. I'm not sure I can speak to the other regions. I'm sure Green Mountains is similar, but Maine being a little further north than the Adirondacks, I don't have an experience there. I don't know, Annie, if you know about Maine, if it's a similar time frame or if it's a little later. But she did specifically ask about New Hampshire, so it's second week of June in New Hampshire. Do you mean wait 30 seconds before taking the photo? Yes, and yes, we do. So you shut the airplane mode off, and it's good to wait a little bit, and then go into the app and take the photo, because your phone is sort of waking up. The app itself will activate the GPS in a way, and I have found that even going into that location field that she showed you, going back out and going back into it again can actually improve the accuracy. So as you're filling out those other pieces of information, if you choose to do that, the accuracy can improve over that time frame as well. So just checking that at the end is in some places you're just not going to get that great of accuracy, And I wouldn't sweat that too much because, you know, we have that accuracy data point in there, so we can make decisions on the back end in our analysis of, are we going to include the lower accuracy observations or not? It depends on what we're asking of the data. So submit it even if the accuracy isn't that great. But yeah, waiting helps a lot. Do you know if there is a similar project in the Rockies? I don't know. It's a good question. But you can go on iNaturalist and search projects. So if you're in the Rockies, maybe that's you just want to go on the iNaturalist website and go into the projects area and search around for different projects there. As an administrator of the project, can you request obscured data from iNaturalist or imperiled species so you are aware of their true locations? Yes, you can. Annie, do you have anything to add there? I don't think they withhold anything if you're...
This is where it's important that we have members join the project and share their coordinates, because curators of the iNaturalist website can access that information, but curators of projects only have access to that data if members share it explicitly with them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is, when doing the observations, how big of a coverage space do you base your estimate on? For example, in the photo up right now, would I try to estimate how many open flowers in the whole population of white flowers, or just a single plant? The way that's a great question. The way that we have done it, even in our own plots, is we select a patch. So, and it varies by species somewhat. For example, hobblebush, you might just do one hobblebush, but it's got multiple flower heads. I would say that you are picking a patch that's no bigger than 3 by 3 feet, and that what you end up making the observation based on is what is visible in the photo. This is a little bit of a challenge for us, because then, you know, if the photo doesn't show the full population, you may be getting, skewed data. But with iNaturalist, what we're trying to do is we're actually going to look at how this compares to our plot data, so that we'll get a sense of how useful are these photos in the context of getting that full picture of the species across the region. But I think that it's going to be based on what's in the photo, and you should make it on a 3 by 3 foot patch. But it can be a much more close-up picture as well. So, but the data is going to be based on what you can see in the photo. And if you submit more than one photo, it's what you can see in the photo that shows the most. Hopefully that's clear. Let me know, Jillian, if you want to follow up on that question. The next question is, are there locations that you need us to focus on where there are fewer picks last year? That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that.
I have an idea.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that Maine as a state has a lot of alpine zones that are very spread out. So I don't know if you're located anywhere near there, but there are quite a few different peaks. The largest being Baxter State Park and having Katahdin, but there's also the Bigelows and Saddleback, which are hundreds of miles away. So I think Maine is going to need the most help with this project.
Great, thank you. And I think, what we're trying to do is get these photos year after year, even of the same trail section. So while we may have only gotten a few photos or a lot of photos on a certain trail section last year, what we're really trying to do is look at phenology every year. So repeating that same trail section is just as important. So yeah, so I think that we can take a, if there's a certain region you're interested in hiking in, let us know, Janet, and we'll get back to you on that. For iPhone users, next question is, for iPhone users, consider using low battery mode rather than airplane mode. The phone is in low battery mode, doesn't seek updated information until an app is opened. Thank you, Sandy. That's a good tip. We have about 5 more questions to get through here. And Annie, I don't know if you see any raised hands, because I have not. So, do you have prompts, questions for the general flora fauna project? I'm not sure I know what you mean. I mean, the only questions that are asked are these observation fields that we're having people fill in. If you signed up for this project and you took a picture of a dragonfly, those questions will still be there, but they obviously don't apply. So that's one, caveat of using the project and covering all species, but having questions that relate to plants. So that that is in there. I'm not sure, Trevor, if you want to clarify that question or if I answered it. Next question is, could you re-clarify when you should make coordinates obscured versus private? If they're private, can you access them for the project? Annie, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So if you take a picture of a species that is endangered or threatened locally or globally, iNaturalist will automatically obscure that information. If you take a picture of something that is perhaps something you personally want to obscure, either for your own privacy or you think it is an endangered species and it just hasn't been updated in the iNaturalist server yet, then you can choose to do that. Whether it happens automatically or you choose to obscure something, if you join our project and opt to share your coordinates, then we will be able to use that information even if it's not publicly visible. And I think iNaturalist is working on other ways for this to work, but currently that's the only option. So I guess the answer is, if you join the project and opt to share your coordinates, then those other issues are not a problem for us, at least. And then you can just obscure and make things private as you deem necessary.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what have you found with your observations to date? So we just piloted this last year, although we were able to bring in photos from previous years. So while I say we started last year, some of the photos that we've documented so far include back to, I think, 2015. And to date, we've only been able to look at how the iNaturalist observations and flowering time vary with elevation. We don't have enough to start to look at trends. We also compare them to our plot data, and they overlapped. The timing of peak flowering, for example, overlapped quite well with our plot data, so that was encouraging as well. So we have done some data analysis, but there's still much more data to be brought in and to do. And the journal posts, the blog posts that are on our project page, we will update at the end of the season with how participation went. And then eventually, as we get the data analysis done, we will also post reports there as well as AMC's website. So, Jillian says, nope, I answered her question, so thank you. And then the last question here is, if I zoom in on one flower for a photo, can I enter % flower for the 3x3 plot it's in, or only what's visible in the photo? I think that you should only do what's visible in the photo, because the photo is the documentation, is the data point in the end. And so we will be, quality controlling and double checking some of these observations. And so we're left with what's in the photo. Whereas you may have been there at the time to be able to say something different about the full 3x3 plot, which, you know, is helpful, but at the same time, the photo is what is going to last through time as the data point. So we have to go on that. So I would say take your photo as the plot that you are basically reporting on and fill in your fields based on that photo is the best policy. All right, I got through the list of questions that are there so far. We'll give it a few more minutes if anyone has any additional questions. But please remember that we will be circulating a survey, and we look forward to your feedback on the webinar and on the project through that survey. And we also will be circulating a link to the recording of this webinar. And yeah, so we'll just give it a few more minutes to see if we have any additional questions. Great, I think, oh, we got one. Nope, it's just a thank you. Sounds very interesting, good. I do have one more question here. Is there any way to connect with other MAC observers to go on a hike? I'm not sure I know what MAC observers are. Oh, AMC, oh, just a typo. I don't know, that's a good question. We are gonna reach out to the chapters. We put alerts in the chapter newsletters to do this. So that's a great question, and we will follow up with you, Ruth, on that because there might be a great opportunity to maybe hold a chapter hike where we do get people out together, because going into the field to do this is a whole nother experience. So we will keep you posted on that. And you're in the Worcester chapter, great. So I will follow up with you on that, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you. All right. Last chance for final questions. All right, well, thank you everyone for taking the time out at lunchtime to participate. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you join our project and get outside as soon as, well, I'm looking outside my window here and there's still quite a bit of snow on the ground, so we won't be doing it here in New Hampshire, but I'm sure some of you are getting some spring. So get out there and let us know what's happening. Thank you.